Why did my senior prank video make me unemployable for life? The whole thing started because our principal, Mr. Garrett Hayes, had this ridiculous policy about student parking permits costing $200 per semester, while faculty parked for free in spaces twice as close to the building. We'd been complaining for months, circulating petitions that went nowhere, holding student council meetings where our concerns got dismissed with corporate speak about budget allocations and maintenance costs. My best friend Lucas Chen and I decided that for our senior prank, we'd make a statement about the hypocrisy by creating a fake auction for the principal's reserved parking spot, complete with a professional-looking website and promotional video. The plan was simple. Film ourselves measuring his parking space, interviewing students about what they'd pay for premium parking, and ending with a satirical listing that highlighted how administrators got perks while students got nickel and dimed. We'd post it on YouTube the Friday before graduation. Everyone would laugh at the absurdity, and maybe the administration would finally realize how tone-deaf their policies were. I borrowed my older sister's camera equipment because she did freelance videography work, got a decent microphone, and spent a week planning shots that would make the whole thing look legitimate enough to be funny, but obviously fake enough to avoid actual trouble. Lucas handled the website design, creating a mock auction page that looked professional, but included ridiculous terms like bidding must be conducted in interpretive dance form and payment, accepted in cafeteria pizza only. We started filming on a Thursday afternoon in late April, when most students had already left campus, but enough cars remained in the lot to make it look authentic. I set up the camera on a tripod near the front entrance, framing the shot to show the principal's reserved spot with its fancy painted curb and personalized sign while keeping the main office windows visible in the background. Lucas stood in front of the camera doing his best impression of an auction house representative, describing the parking space's features with exaggerated enthusiasm about its proximity to the building and superior asphalt quality. We were laughing so hard between takes that it took us almost an hour to get footage we could actually use, but eventually we had enough material for a solid 5-minute video. The last shot was supposed to be me measuring the parking space with an actual tape measure, while Lucas provided commentary about square footage and premium location value, really hammering home how ridiculous it was that this spot sat empty most days, while students parked in a gravel lot behind the gym. I had just knelt down with the tape measure when Lucas suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence, his face going weird as he stared past the camera toward the main office. I turned around to see what had grabbed his attention and spotted Principal Hayes through his office window, clearly visible about 40 feet away, leaning over his desk in an animated conversation with someone I recognized as Councilman Derek Vaughn, who served on the city council and school board. Nothing about that scene would have mattered, except for what happened next, which I didn't even notice until much later when I was editing the footage on my laptop. Principal Hayes pulled out a large manila envelope from his desk drawer and handed it across to Councilman Vaughn, who opened it and started counting what looked like cash, lots of cash, bills thick enough that even from our camera angle you could tell this wasn't $20 for a pizza fund. Vaughn counted deliberately, his lips moving as he rifled through the stack, then nodded and tucked the envelope into his briefcase before shaking Hayes' hand with this satisfied expression on his face. The whole exchange took maybe 30 seconds, and I'd been completely focused on getting the tape measure reading while Lucas tried not to laugh, so neither of us registered what the camera had captured in the background. We finished shooting, packed up the equipment, and headed to my house to start editing, both of us excited about pulling off a harmless prank that would give everyone a laugh during the stress of final exams. I spent that evening cutting together the footage, adding graphics and text overlays that made it look like a genuine auction listing, even finding royalty-free music that sounded vaguely fancy and official. The video came together perfectly, hitting that sweet spot between obviously satirical and professional enough to be entertaining. Lucas came over Saturday morning to review the final cut before we posted it, and we must have watched it 20 times, tweaking timing and adjusting jokes until we were both satisfied. Neither of us noticed the background activity in the principal's office during our last shot because we were focused on our performance in the foreground and the comedic timing of our dialogue. I uploaded the video to YouTube on Friday morning during first period, posted the link to every social media platform I had, and watched it spread through our school's student body within minutes. By lunch, the video had 3,000 views, and students were coming up to us in the hallway quoting our lines and laughing about the absurdity of $200 parking permits. Teachers who saw it seemed amused rather than angry, probably because we hadn't actually done anything destructive, and the satire was aimed at policy rather than individuals. Principal Hayes called us to his office during sixth period, and I figured we'd get the standard lecture about respecting authority and proper channels for expressing concerns, maybe a week of detention for unauthorized filming on school property. Instead, Hayes seemed almost relieved when he saw us, telling us the video was funny but asking us to take it down since some school board members didn't appreciate students mocking administrative decisions. He said if we removed it voluntarily, there would be no consequences, and we could consider it a lesson learned about professional conduct. Lucas and I agreed immediately because we'd already gotten the laughs we wanted and had no interest in extending the joke into actual conflict with administration. I pulled out my phone right there in his office and deleted the video from YouTube while Hayes watched, nodding approvingly and saying he appreciated our willingness to be reasonable. We walked out of his office feeling like we'd gotten away with something, having pulled off a successful senior prank without any real punishment. But that night, my phone started blowing up with texts from people asking why I'd deleted the video and whether I'd been threatened with expulsion. Apparently, in the 8 hours the video had been live, dozens of people had downloaded copies, and some guy I barely knew had already re-uploaded it to his own YouTube channel, where it was spreading even faster, because now it had the added intrigue of being censored by school administration. By Sunday morning, the video had been shared to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even made it onto Reddit's front page, under a post titled, "High School Students Expose Parking Permit Scam with Hilarious Auction Video." Comments ranged from people praising our creativity to others sharing their own stories about school administrations, squeezing money from students while administrators enjoyed perks. The video hit 50,000 views by Sunday afternoon, then 200,000 by Monday morning, growing exponentially as news sites picked it up and started writing articles about student activism and creative protest. I woke up Monday to find my phone completely overwhelmed with notifications, messages from journalists requesting interviews, and emails from random people saying they loved the video. Lucas called me before school started, his voice excited as he described seeing our video featured on a morning news program's website under their viral video section. We met up before first period, both of us buzzing with the surreal experience of accidental internet fame, joking about how our stupid parking space prank had somehow resonated with people across the country who were tired of getting nickel and dimed by institutions. That excitement lasted until third period, when I got called to the principal's office again, this time finding not just Hayes, but also Assistant Principal Gloria Murphy and our school's resource officer, Deputy Frank Kowalski. The atmosphere was completely different from Friday's meeting, with Hayes standing behind his desk instead of sitting, his face tight with anger as he demanded to know whether I'd secretly kept copies of the video despite agreeing to delete it. I explained that I'd deleted it like he asked, but had no control over the dozens of people who downloaded it before removal, that re-uploads were happening faster than anyone could track them. Hayes didn't seem to care about my explanation, saying I'd made a commitment to remove the content and had failed to follow through, that my lack of control over the situation didn't absolve me of responsibility for creating it in the first place. He said the school board had held an emergency meeting Sunday night to discuss the video, and had decided that students who used school property to create content mocking administration would face serious consequences. I pointed out that we'd specifically avoided mocking any individuals and had focused on policy criticism, which seemed protected under basic free speech principles we'd learned about in government class. Assistant Principal Murphy cut me off, saying this wasn't about free speech, but about unauthorized commercial activity on school grounds, claiming that by posting the video to YouTube, where ads could generate revenue, Lucas and I had engaged in business operations without proper permits or approvals. The accusation was absurd, since the video had earned maybe $3 in ad revenue before I deleted it. But Deputy Kowalski backed her up by saying the school had the right to regulate commercial activity on its property. They suspended me for 10 days, effective immediately, for violating school policies regarding unauthorized filming, commercial activity, and disrespect toward administration. Lucas got the same suspension, even though he'd barely touched the camera. Apparently being on camera was enough to share culpability. My parents were furious when they picked me up, not at me, but at the administration's overreaction to a harmless prank that had gotten out of hand through no fault of ours. My dad, who worked as an attorney specializing in employment law, immediately recognized the suspension as retaliation for embarrassing the administration rather than legitimate policy enforcement. He said we should fight it, that schools couldn't punish students for speech just because it went viral and attracted unwanted attention. But my mom worried about how fighting would look on college applications, whether causing more conflict with administration would hurt my chances at scholarships or recommendations. We decided to accept the suspension and let things blow over, figuring 10 days wasn't worth a prolonged battle that might create worse consequences down the road. That decision haunts me now, because accepting the suspension made everything that came next seem legitimate. During my suspension, the video continued spreading, eventually hitting 2 million views across various re-uploads and social media shares. News outlets started doing deeper dives into student parking fees across different schools, using our video as a jumping-off point for broader stories about how schools funded themselves through fees that disproportionately affected lower-income families. Education bloggers wrote think pieces about student activism and the importance of platforms that let young people critique institutions. For about a week, Lucas and I were inadvertent spokespeople for a movement we hadn't intended to start, with journalists calling our houses and requesting interviews about student rights and administrative transparency. My parents decided I shouldn't do any interviews while suspended, wanting to avoid anything that might be construed as capitalizing on the controversy or antagonizing school administration further. Lucas's parents felt the same way, so we both stayed quiet while strangers debated our video across the internet. That's when someone did what neither Lucas nor I had thought to do. They watched our video with audio editing software and isolated the background conversation happening in Principal Hayes' office. The words weren't clear enough to make out, but the visual of that manila envelope changing hands was crystal clear in high definition. Someone posted an enhanced version of our video to Reddit, zooming in on the office window and slowing down the footage of the cash exchange between Hayes and Councilman Vaughn. The post titled, "What's Really Happening in the Background of This Viral School Video," started gaining traction immediately, with people speculating about what could require that much cash to change hands between a school principal and a city councilman who voted on school budgets. Comments ranged from innocent explanations like fundraiser donations to darker theories about kickbacks and bribes related to school construction contracts or vendor relationships. I saw the enhanced video Wednesday night, 3 days into my suspension, and felt my stomach drop as I realized what we'd accidentally filmed. The exchange looked bad regardless of what innocent explanation might exist. And given Hayes' aggressive reaction to our video, I started wondering whether his anger had less to do with parking permit satire and more to do with that 30-second window into his office. Lucas called me immediately after seeing the same video, his voice tight with anxiety as he asked whether we'd accidentally recorded something illegal and whether that made us witnesses to a crime we didn't know had been committed. Neither of us knew what to do with the information because we had no context for what the exchange meant, just footage that looked suspicious when isolated and enhanced. My dad suggested we might want to report it to the school board or local authorities, let proper investigators determine whether anything improper had occurred. But before we could decide on any course of action, the story exploded beyond our control. A local news station ran a segment Thursday night about the enhanced video, interviewing a former FBI agent who specialized in corruption cases. He said that while the footage alone didn't prove anything illegal, the optics of a cash exchange between a school official and a politician who oversaw school funding definitely warranted investigation. The segment included footage of reporters trying to ask Principal Hayes and Councilman Vaughn about the exchange, both men refusing to comment, and Hayes specifically saying the video had been manipulated and taken out of context. Vaughn's response was even more defensive, claiming the footage was doctored by students seeking attention and that he'd never received any improper payments from anyone. By Friday, the state attorney general's office announced they were opening a preliminary investigation into financial relationships between school administrators and local government officials. I came back to school the following Monday, expecting things to have calmed down, but instead found myself treated as a pariah by faculty and staff who'd previously been friendly or neutral. Teachers who used to joke around with me in the hallways now avoided eye contact or gave me cold stares when we passed. Vice Principal Murphy pulled me aside before first period to say that while my suspension was complete, I needed to understand that my actions had created a hostile work environment for staff and that any further disruptions would result in expulsion. The message was clear, even if unspoken. Shut up and disappear for your last 6 weeks of high school or face consequences that would destroy your college prospects. Lucas reported similar treatment, with his guidance counselor suddenly finding problems with his college recommendation letters that needed revisions, delays that threatened to miss application deadlines for scholarships he'd been counting on. We'd gone from pulling a funny prank to accidentally becoming whistleblowers who'd made powerful people very uncomfortable, and those people were making their displeasure known through 1,000 small acts of retaliation. The investigation developed slowly through May and into early June, with news reports about subpoenas being issued for financial records and testimony from various school employees. The state attorney general's office was tight-lipped about their findings, releasing only brief statements about ongoing investigations into potential violations of ethics laws and conflicts of interest. But leaks started appearing in local news coverage, anonymous sources describing a pattern of construction contracts being awarded to companies owned by Councilman Vaughn's family members, with Hayes receiving payments disguised as consulting fees or donations to school programs he controlled personally. The cash exchange we'd filmed wasn't an isolated incident, but apparently part of a years-long scheme where Hayes helped steer millions in school construction contracts to Vaughn's family businesses in exchange for kickbacks that supplemented his salary. Our accidental 30-second background footage had provided visual evidence of transactions that investigators had suspected but couldn't prove, making our video a critical piece of evidence in a growing criminal case. I graduated in early June with honors, having maintained good grades despite the chaos of spring semester. But graduation felt hollow because teachers who should have been celebrating our achievements barely acknowledged Lucas or me during the ceremony, as if our presence reminded them of an investigation that had put the entire district under scrutiny. Several local colleges where I'd applied sent rejection letters in the weeks after graduation, schools where my grades and test scores should have guaranteed acceptance. The letters were generic, citing competitive applicant pools and limited spaces, but the timing felt suspicious, especially when I learned other students with lower qualifications had been accepted. My dad encouraged me to appeal the decisions, maybe even consider legal action if we could prove discrimination based on the video controversy. But I was exhausted from being at the center of unwanted attention, tired of feeling like everything I did was being watched and judged by people looking for reasons to punish me for accidentally exposing something I hadn't meant to discover. I enrolled at a state university about 3 hours from home, far enough to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that the story might not have penetrated social circles there. The first semester went smoothly, with professors and students who had no idea about my viral video or the investigation it had triggered. I kept my head down, focused on coursework, and avoided any situation that might connect me to controversy or online attention. But in November, Principal Hayes and Councilman Vaughn were indicted on multiple counts of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the school district. The news coverage featured our original parking permit video alongside the enhanced footage showing the cash exchange, with my name and Lucas's name appearing in every article as the students whose prank had accidentally exposed a corruption scheme. The story went national, appearing on network news programs and generating countless think pieces about how citizen journalism and accidental documentation were reshaping accountability. I did one interview with a national news program at my parents' urging, explaining how we'd just been trying to make a funny video about parking permits and had no idea we were capturing anything significant in the background. That interview was supposed to humanize me, show that I was just a college student who'd stumbled into something bigger than myself. Instead, it triggered a backlash from Hayes' defense team, who started publicly claiming that Lucas and I had deliberately filmed the exchange as part of a coordinated smear campaign against their client. They filed motions demanding our phones and computers be seized as evidence, claiming we might have additional footage or communications that proved premeditation. The accusations were absurd, easily disproved by the raw footage showing us laughing and joking while the exchange happened unnoticed in the background. But the defense team wasn't interested in truth. They were interested in creating doubt and shifting blame onto teenage targets who'd made their client's prosecution possible. News articles started appearing with headlines like "Did student pranksters set up school principal?" and questions raised about motives behind viral corruption video. Comment sections filled with conspiracy theories about me and Lucas being pawns of political opponents or having family connections to people who wanted Hayes and Vaughn destroyed. My second semester at university became a nightmare as students recognized me from news coverage and started treating me with suspicion or outright hostility. Someone created a website called Expose the Exposers that collected every piece of information about my life they could find. Photos, social media posts, family details, and even transcripts of the interview I'd done. The site framed me as a manipulative attention seeker who'd ruined innocent lives for internet fame and college application material. Nothing on the site was technically illegal since it was all publicly available information, but having it compiled in one place with hostile commentary made me feel exposed and vulnerable in ways I'd never experienced. My parents hired an attorney to send cease and desist letters, but the site operators hid behind anonymous registration and First Amendment protections. I started getting hateful emails calling me a snitch and a liar, messages that ranged from general insults to specific threats about what would happen if I testified at trial. Campus security was notified, but they said unless threats became specific and credible, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols near my dorm. The trial began in March, almost exactly a year after Lucas and I had filmed our stupid parking permit video. I was subpoenaed to testify about how the footage was created, what we'd intended to film, and what we'd noticed during the actual shooting. Taking the stand felt surreal, sitting in a courtroom packed with media while lawyers questioned me about camera angles and editing choices. The prosecution was friendly, walking me through a straightforward narrative about students making a satirical video who accidentally captured evidence of corruption. The defense attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Diane Keller, was less gentle. She spent 3 hours trying to make me admit I'd known about the cash exchange, had deliberately positioned the camera to capture it, had possibly even coordinated with anti-Hayes factions to set up the shot. Her questions were designed to confuse and contradict, taking innocent statements and twisting them into implications of conspiracy. When she asked whether I'd benefited from the video's fame, I had to admit doing one paid interview for $500, which she immediately pounced on as evidence of financial motivation. By the time I left the stand, I felt like I'd been turned inside out. Every aspect of my character and intentions questioned and dissected for public consumption. Lucas testified the next day and got similar treatment, with Keller suggesting he'd been the mastermind who positioned me as the face of the operation. The trial lasted 5 weeks, with forensic accountants explaining money trails and former school employees testifying about Hayes' suspicious financial activities. In early April, the jury found both Hayes and Vaughn guilty on multiple counts. Hayes was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison plus restitution of $1.7 million to the school district. Vaughn got 12 years because of additional charges related to his abuse of political office. The verdict should have felt vindicating, proof that Lucas and I had accidentally done something important by exposing real corruption. Instead, it felt like the beginning of worse problems. Within days of the verdict, I started applying for summer internships related to my marketing major, positions that would give me professional experience before my junior year. Every application got rejected, often without even an initial interview. At first I thought it was normal competition, but then one company's HR representative accidentally sent me an internal email chain where hiring managers discussed my application. The emails were blunt, saying I had strong qualifications, but that hiring someone with my public profile was too risky, that companies couldn't afford to be associated with controversial figures regardless of whether I'd done the right thing. One manager wrote that I was a liability who'd proven willing to expose employer wrongdoing, making me fundamentally untrustworthy in any corporate environment. Another suggested I might secretly film workplace activities and leak them if I disagreed with company policies. The email chain made clear that my viral video and testimony had marked me as permanently radioactive to potential employers. I showed the emails to my academic advisor, hoping she'd have advice about overcoming the employment barrier. She was sympathetic but realistic, explaining that many companies specifically searched candidates' names online before hiring, and that my case had been too high profile to ever fade from search results. She suggested I might want to consider changing my name legally, creating enough distance from the controversy that employers wouldn't immediately connect me to the corruption case. The suggestion felt like defeat, like I needed to erase my identity because I'd accidentally done something people claimed to value. I spent that summer working at my uncle's landscaping business, the only employment I could get because family loyalty mattered more than Google search results. Lucas had similar problems, getting rejected from internships despite his computer science degree track usually having high placement rates. He ended up working at a grocery store, feeling like his education was being wasted because we'd committed the sin of making powerful people look bad. My junior year started with me changing strategies, applying only to smaller companies or startups that might care less about controversy. But the problem wasn't just big corporations. It was anyone who searched my name and saw articles about corruption trials and whistleblower testimony. Even places that brought me in for interviews would ultimately pass, often with feedback about culture fit or concern about team dynamics that felt like code for we don't want someone who might expose problems. By spring semester, I'd applied to over 200 internships and jobs with 0 offers. My grades were excellent, my recommendations were strong from professors who knew my work, but none of that mattered against the permanent digital record of being the student who'd brought down a principal and councilman. Career services counselors were baffled, saying they'd never seen someone with my qualifications get rejected so consistently. I graduated college in May with a degree in marketing and no job prospects, moving back home with my parents while Lucas moved back in with his parents in the same situation. We'd both become cautionary tales about the cost of accidental whistleblowing, proof that doing the right thing could destroy your life just as thoroughly as doing the wrong thing. That summer, I applied for basic retail positions, entry-level office work, anything that would get me employment history and references. But even retail managers searched Google, finding articles about me and deciding I was too risky or too much drama for minimum wage work. I lived on unemployment benefits and gig economy jobs that didn't require background checks, delivering food and doing odd jobs posted on task apps. The isolation was crushing, watching former classmates post about their careers and professional achievements while I couldn't even get hired to stock shelves. Lucas started a YouTube channel about his experience, documenting the impossibility of finding work after becoming known for whistleblowing. His videos gained moderate attention from people interested in employment discrimination and corporate retaliation, but monetization was difficult because his content wasn't advertiser-friendly. He interviewed employment attorneys who explained that what we were experiencing wasn't technically illegal, since employers could make hiring decisions based on any factors except protected classes. And whistleblower status wasn't a protected class in most employment contexts. Companies could legally refuse to hire us because they didn't want employees with public profiles suggesting willingness to expose wrongdoing. The system was perfectly designed to punish exactly the behavior society claimed to want more of. I spent 2 years in a cycle of applications and rejections, watching my savings disappear and my confidence erode with each form letter thanking me for my interest while informing me they'd moved forward with other candidates. Some companies were honest about their concerns, saying my history made me a risk they couldn't justify. Most just stopped responding after initial screenings. I tried freelancing, offering marketing services to small businesses, but building a client base required networking and references I didn't have. Every meeting where I introduced myself risked someone recognizing my name and connecting me to controversy they wanted to avoid. By 2024, I was 26 years old with a college degree and a resume that showed 2 years of food delivery and task work since graduation. The breaking point came when I applied for a position with a nonprofit focused on government transparency and accountability, figuring that maybe an organization explicitly dedicated to exposing corruption would appreciate someone with my background. They brought me in for 3 rounds of interviews, seemed enthusiastic about my perspective and experience, even joked about how I'd already done their job as a teenager. Then they called to say they'd decided to move forward with another candidate, someone whose qualifications were stronger, fit for their current needs. I later learned through a mutual connection that their board had vetoed my hiring because major donors had expressed concerns about being associated with someone who damaged relationships with local government officials. Even organizations supposedly committed to transparency didn't want the reputational risk of employing an actual whistleblower. That's when I started researching legal options, whether Lucas and I had grounds for any kind of action against the people who'd turned us into unemployable pariahs. My dad connected me with an attorney named Richard Eng, who specialized in whistleblower retaliation cases. Richard listened to my story and explained that our situation fell into a gap in legal protections. We hadn't been employees who'd reported workplace misconduct, so employment retaliation laws didn't apply. We'd been students who'd accidentally documented criminal activity and testified truthfully when subpoenaed, which should have been protected activity, but wasn't covered by existing whistleblower statutes. He said we might have a case for defamation against people who'd falsely claimed we'd set up Hayes, but proving damages would require showing that specific false statements had directly caused specific employment rejections, an almost impossible evidentiary burden. Richard suggested our best option might be going public again, using media attention to pressure lawmakers into extending whistleblower protections to citizens who reported corruption outside employment contexts. The idea made me sick because more publicity was exactly what had destroyed my employability in the first place. But I'd already lost everything I could lose professionally. So what did I have left to protect? Lucas and I scheduled a joint interview with a national investigative journalism program, explaining how our accidental corruption expose had resulted in permanent employment blacklisting. The interview aired in August 2024, generating significant public reaction and social media discussion about how the system punished people for doing what authorities claimed to want. Politicians made sympathetic noises about fixing gaps in whistleblower protection, but actual legislative action moved with typical glacial speed. The media attention did accomplish one thing, though. It connected me with other whistleblowers who'd experienced similar retaliation and were organizing to push for better protections. I started working with a coalition called the Whistleblower Rights Project, helping them document cases and advocate for policy changes. The work was volunteer since they had no budget to pay staff, but it gave me purpose and connected me with people who understood what I'd been through. Lucas joined too, using his technical skills to build a database tracking retaliation cases and helping whistleblowers document their experiences. We became accidental activists, fighting for protections we should have had before our lives got destroyed. In November 2024, a state representative named Julia Brennan introduced legislation creating employment protections for citizens who reported corruption or testified in public integrity cases. The Whistleblower Protection Expansion Act made it illegal for employers to discriminate in hiring or retention based on someone's status as a witness in corruption investigations or their role in exposing government misconduct. Companies violating the law would face fines and civil liability to victims. The bill gained bipartisan support after our media interview brought attention to the issue, with legislators recognizing that punishing people for exposing corruption created incentives for everyone to stay silent about wrongdoing. The bill passed in March 2025, 6 years after Lucas and I had filmed our parking permit video. By then, I was 27 years old with gaps in my employment history that no law could erase. But the new protections meant I could at least apply for jobs without automatic disqualification based on my whistleblower history. Companies could still reject me for other reasons, but they couldn't legally cite my testimony or public profile as justification. I started applying again, this time including a cover letter explaining my background and noting that discrimination based on my whistleblower status violated state law. The addition didn't magically open doors, but it changed conversations. In June 2025, I got hired by a corporate compliance firm that specifically sought out people with my background, figuring that someone who'd accidentally exposed corruption might have useful perspective on identifying red flags and building ethical workplace cultures. The job paid well, used my marketing degree to develop compliance training programs, and explicitly valued rather than punished my history. Lucas got hired by a cybersecurity firm around the same time, his technical skills and experience documenting whistleblower retaliation, making him attractive to companies worried about internal threats. We'd both finally found employment 7 years after our senior prank video had accidentally captured corruption. But those 7 years represented lost time, lost opportunities, and lost belief that doing the right thing would be rewarded rather than punished. Principal Hayes served 5 years of his 8-year sentence before being released on parole. Councilman Vaughn was still in federal prison, his longer sentence reflecting his abuse of public office. The school district had implemented new financial controls and ethics requirements, reforms prompted by our accidental exposure of their systemic failures. Students still paid for parking permits, though the cost had been reduced to $50 per semester after public scrutiny of the district's budget practices. None of these changes brought back the years Lucas and I spent unemployable, the opportunities we'd missed, or the futures we'd imagined before a 30-second background shot changed everything. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd filmed our video from a different angle, if Principal Hayes' office window hadn't been visible in the frame, if Lucas and I had noticed the cash exchange and decided to delete the footage rather than face what came after. Would Hayes and Vaughn still be stealing from the school district? Would other students have eventually exposed them? Would my life look different if I'd chosen self-preservation over truth? Those questions don't have answers, just alternative histories that might have been easier but wouldn't have been right. I'd done nothing wrong except make a joke and accidentally record reality, yet the punishment for that accident was nearly permanent unemployability and years of being treated as toxic by a system that claimed to value integrity. Looking back now from age 27, with a stable job and reconstructed life, I can acknowledge that our video made a difference beyond ruining my employment prospects. The corruption we exposed had been ongoing for years, stealing resources meant for students and teachers. The reforms implemented after Hayes' conviction probably prevented future theft and abuse. The whistleblower protections our case helped inspire would protect other people who found themselves accidentally or intentionally exposing wrongdoing. These outcomes mattered. They represented real positive change that wouldn't have happened without our video. But the cost of that change had been borne almost entirely by 2 teenagers who just wanted to make people laugh about parking permits And no amount of policy reform could give us back the 7 years we spent being punished for accidentally doing the right thing. The real lesson wasn't that whistleblowing was good or bad, noble or foolish, worth it or not worth it. The lesson was that systems protect themselves first, and people who threaten those systems, even accidentally, even righteously, will pay a price that nobody warns you about until it's too late to choose differently. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.